Okay, so now we're going to take a look at how to add elements to an array that already exists. So we've seen how to initialize an array to contain a bunch of values to start off with, but we haven't yet seen how to add elements, and that's what this part of the tutorial will do. So first we're going to focus on something else, and that's just going to be on how to initialize an array of all the same values. So we've seen how to manually put in values into an array when we initialize it. Now we're going to look at how to initialize it using just a bunch of the same values with one simple line. And we're also going to look at the two different ways to add elements to the end of an array. Okay, so this is going to be how to add elements and how to initialize elements or an array all of the same value. Alright, so now we've seen a bunch of stuff we can do with arrays, or rather how to initialize them and how to access and modify them. We're going to look at a different way to create an array of all the same object, and we're also going to look at how to add elements to an array that already exists. So what we're going to do first is create this array of all the same objects, and the way we do that is, aside from doing this kind of thing, so before we saw if we had like a bool array and type boolean, we could initialize it to contain a bunch of boolean values such as true, false, true, or something like that. If we wanted them to be all the same, we could do that. We could say true, 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 and we could just keep doing this, but that gets very tedious, and it also takes a long time if we have an array that's like 100 elements long. There's a faster way to do that, and that's to call this function. So if we do this, we say variable bool array equals array, and we're going to call this function that's called repeating, and we're going to give it a colon, and then the element or the item that we want to repeat, so in this case true, so we want to create a boolean array with a bunch of trues in it, and we're going to have the count, and let's say we want 10. Okay, so this is basically just creating this array. It's a boolean array, and it's just going to contain a bunch of the value trues, and we're going to add this value 10 times. Okay, so this array by the end will contain 10 trues, and as we can see here, if we just expand this out, we get an array with a bunch of true statements in it. Okay, so that's one faster way to initialize an array, but they all have to be the same value. Okay, in this case we wanted that. We just wanted to create a boolean array with a bunch of trues in it. Okay, so if you have an array that's going to be 100 elements long and it contains all ones or all zeros or all trues or something, then this is a much faster way to do it than to initialize it by hand. Okay, so that's something we can do. That's how to initialize an array with a bunch of the same values. Now I'll show you how to add to an array that already exists. So let's create this integer array, int array, and we have type int. And in fact what we're going to do is we're just going to initialize this to be empty at first. Okay, so this is it. We just created this array. We know that it's going to contain integer values when it's not empty, but for now it's just this empty array, nothing inside of it. Well, we can either, I think the best way to add these elements, well, we can kind of do this in one of two ways. The first way is going to be by calling this append function. So if we have int array dot append, and as you can see it's the first one on our list here, so we're going to select that, and then it says new element and type element. So what we can do is we'll just add in an element, so let's say 3 that we want to add, and there we go. See, and now it updated here, and so we get a 3 in our array. Okay, and then let's say we wanted to add another one, int array dot append, and let's add in like a 5 or something. Then the array now contains a 3 and a 5. Just be aware that the append function adds the new items in the array to the end of the array. Okay, so that is the append function for you. So it basically just takes our array. We could have this have some values already, so we could have this be an int array that already contains something like 6, 3, -5. Okay, and that's fine, and we can still add to it. And yeah, so this is just one of the ways to do it. Was it saying consecutive state? Ah, I see. Keep adding the semicolon instead of the colon. Okay, yeah, so there we go. We see that we have some values initially in it, and then we're just adding some more values onto the end of it, which in this case is just a 3 and a 5. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. The other way is if you want to add kind of two arrays together, we can do that. So what we'll do is we have an integer array already. So I just kind of want to make this easy to understand just by having a few values in it. So let's just have it contain 6 and 2 to start off with. And we're going to have int array plus equals. So we've seen this operator before. This is basically the same as saying int array equals whatever int array already contains plus something else. And in this case, we're going to add some numbers here. We're going to add a 3, a 4, and a 5. Alright, so let's see if that works, and it does. So we have a 6, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, added it onto the end. So this is basically the same as saying our int array now contains whatever it had before, which in this case was a 6 and a 2, plus 3, 4, and 5 that we just added onto the end of it. So now we have this array of 6, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's two ways to add items to an array. These don't have to be integers particularly. I think it's just integers are kind of faster to type out than strings or whatever. So yeah, so now you've seen a way to initialize an array of a bunch of the same values. There's a huge time saver if you need an array, an extremely long array where they're all the same. And we've also seen how to add items to the end of the array. So we can call the array.append and add one item at a time, or we can call this plus equals and add a bunch of items at once. So just bear in mind that the append function only adds one element at a time, whereas this can add, and this basically is just adding two arrays together. Okay, so now you've seen how to start an array of a bunch of the same values and how to add elements to the end. Our next part will be focusing on some other cool functions that you can do, such as inserting and removing elements at different indexes. Okay, so in this part we looked at how to add elements to an array that already exists. So there are actually two parts, and the first part was how to create an array of all the same values. And we did this by calling this array function, and we have a repeating variable and a count of however many times we want that variable to appear. So let's say we had an array of integers, and this was the example we used. Then we would put the type here, so we'd call repeating colon, and then let's say we want to add a bunch of 5s. Then the variable would be 5 here, and the count would be however many 5s we want to add. And this is a much faster way of adding elements than to do something like just initializing the array and saying it contains 5, 5, 5, 5, 100 times or whatever. So if we have a really long array and we know that they're all going to be the same value, I think this array with the repeating and the count functions is definitely the way to go. We also focused on the second part of our tutorial on how to add elements to the end using the append method or the plus equals and an array. So if we call the array.append and then we can put in one element at a time, it adds it to the end. But bear in mind, again, it has to be of the same type. So you couldn't add, the number 5 to an array of strings, unless it's a string itself. And the plus equals operator with an array basically just adds two arrays together. So this allows us to add multiple elements to an array at once, whereas the .append was only one element at a time.